going back to the very, very first part of the daf. And that is, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, Shlomim sheshachtam behechel ksher. A carbon shlomim with the shechita took place in the heichel is kosher. Shenema, because the pasuk says, V'shachatu pesach oyel moyed. It says you should shech the shlomim pesach oyel moyed. V'lo yehei tafel chamim min ha'ikar. Doesn't make sense that the pesach of the oyel moyed should be better than the oyel moyed itself. Meaning, if you could shech the shlomim pesach oyel moyed, certainly you should be able to shech the shlomim in the oyel moyed as well. What's the beer in the drasha? It sounds like the shlomim shchita needs to be in a holy place. And as long as I have some nexus to the oyel moyed, I'm connected to it, I'm pesach oyel moyed, so that means I'm in a makom kodesh where right now this is a place that I can go ahead and do the shchita. Well, if pesach oyel moyed satisfies that, certainly the oyel moyed itself would satisfy that as well. The Minchas Chinuch in mitzvah kuf pei daled makes a beautiful diak in the words of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, Shlomim sheshachton behechol ksherim. It sounds a little bit like it's only b'di'evet that if the shlomim shchita took place in the heichal, it's going to be kosher. But lechatchila, if a kohen wanted to go to the heichal and he wanted to shech the carbon shlomim over there, in that instance, it's not something that would be okay. And the Minchas Chinuch is matmiya. He says, I don't understand. Based on the makar of Rabbi Yochanan, which is lo yehei tafel chamim min ha'ikar, why is it a b'di'evet? If the Torah says v'shachtu pesach oyel moed, and that's lechatchila, so why should the oyel moed itself not be lechatchila as well? So the Minchas Chinuch says a davar nifla, and I think it's just kedai, but oifen yisoidi, to be makdim the teretz of the Minchas Chinuch, and that is, the pasuk says in Parshas Achrei Mos, right in the beginning of the parsha, right at the onset of the Torah introducing the Seder Avodah of Yom Kippur. Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe, Achrei Moshe shnei bnei Aharon, bekarvasam l'fnei Hashem vayamusu. V'imr Hashem al Moshe, this is the second pasuk in Parshas Achrei Mos. So Hashem tells Moshe, Daber el Aharon achicha, go speak to Aharon your brother. Tell him the following: V'al yavoi b'chol eisal hakodesh mi beis laparoiches. He can't just enter the Kodesh. He can't just enter the holy place whenever he wants. Where is that holy place? Mi beis laparoiches. On the other side of the curtain, on the other side of the paroiches. Where is that? El Pinei HaKapeiros, where the Kapeiros is, Asher al ha'aron, which is on top of the aron, v'lo yomos, and expect not to die. You can't just go b'chol eisal hakodesh and think v'lo yomos, and the reason is ki be'anon eira la'Kapeiros, because there's such an intense level of shechina that's residing on top of the Kapeiros that you can't just walk in there whenever you want to walk in there. So Hashem tells Moshe, go tell Aharon, you can't just enter what we know as the Kodesh HaKadoshim anytime v'lo yomos. Rather, in the event that Aharon is going to want to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim, this is the way he has to do it. And then the Torah goes and delineates the entire Seder Avodah of Yom Kippur, because that was the one day that the Kohen Gadol, of course, was allowed to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. By the way, when you read the Psukim, the Vilna Gaon's Chiddush jumps off the page, right? That it wasn't even that on Yom Kippur the Kohen Gadol was allowed to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It's Bezois Yavei Aharon ala Kodesh with this Seder Avodah. But the bottom line is, Hashem tells Moshe, go tell Aharon, V'al Yavei b'chol eisal HaKodesh mi beis laparoiches al pnei HaKapeiros asher al ha'aron v'lo yomos ki be'oner al kaparos. And this pasuk is the makar to something every little child knows, and that is that the Kodesh HaKadoshim was off limits. The only person that was allowed to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim was the Kohen Gadol, and the only time that he was allowed to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim was on the holiest day of the year, and that is on Yom Kippur. If you take a look at the Torah's Koyanim on this pasuk, Torah's Koyanim says as follows. It says, V'al yavoi b'choleis el hakodesh mi beis laparoiches. Mi beis laparoiches, like a funny lashon, right? What's mi beis laparoiches? So we said that's on the other side of the paroiches, trying to describe the Kodesh HaKadoshim. What does the word mi beis laparoiches? Okay, so a bayis is an abode. People live inside a house. So mi beis means innovating, right? True. Says the Torah's Koyanim, what does it mean, mi beis laparoiches lahazar al kol habayis? This pasuk is coming to give an azara that really, the Kohen Gadol, Aharon Achicha, or any Kohen for that matter, was not allowed to enter the entire bias, the entire heichal. B'chol es. Yachol al kol habayis b'misa zok the Torah's Kohanim. You would think that if a Kohen or the Kohen Gadol would enter the entire bias, not just the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but the heichal, he would be chayiv misa. Talmud loymar. It says al pnei kapoires asher al ha'aroin v'lo yamos. Where does it say v'lo yamos? Not after the words mi beis laparoiches, but after the next words al pnei kapoires asher al ha'aroin v'lo yamos haketzad. How do you reconcile this pasuk? El pnei kapoires b'misa. If a kohen or a kohen gadol would enter the kodesh hakadoshim b'chol eis, he would be chayiv misa. Val shar kol habayis b'azara. But if he would enter the rest of the bayis b'chol eis just frivolously because he decided that he wants to do it, even though he would not be chayiv misa, because v'layomos is going after the words el pnei kapoires asher al ha'aron. That's for sure talking about the kodesh hakadoshim. But at the same time, in azara he would have. So the Torah's Kohanim says that as much as this pasuk v'yavi b'chol eis al kodesh, everybody knows is the azara that you're not allowed to enter the kodesh hakadoshim. But what not everybody knows is that really this pasuk is an azara also for a kohen or even the kohen gadol to just go ahead and enter the heichal. The Rambam in Hilchas Bias HaMikdash, in the beginning of Parak Beis, he brings this Torah's Kohanim. Ein kohen gadol nichnas l'kodesh hakadoshim ela miyom ha'kippurim l'yom ha'kippurim. From Yom Kippur to Yom Kippur, that was the only time that the kohen gadol was allowed to enter the Holy of Holies. The kohen hedyet nichnas b'chol yom l'kodesh la'avoda. As it relates to the kohen hedyet, every day he was allowed to enter the kodesh, right, the heichal, for avoda. V'huzaru kol ha'kohanim, says the Rambam. All kohanim are prohibited. Shelo yikansu l'kodesh. That they're not allowed to enter the Kodesh or the Kodesh HaKadoshim Shlei B'Shas Avodah Shenemar. How do I know that? Because it says V'al Yavoi B'Choleis Ala Kodesh. And you know what those words mean? Zok the Rambam Zay Kodesh HaKadosh. And then it says Mi Beis Lak Paroiches. You know what those words mean? Lahazer Al Kol Habayis. It's coming to say Al Kol Habayis. Zok the Rambam Vayit Kohen Shenichtas Kodesh HaKadoshim B'Shayim Mois Hashana. A Kohen that enters the Kodesh HaKadoshim B'Shayim Mois Hashana meaning not Yom Kippur. Bein Kohen Hedyet, Bein Kohen Gadol, or even if the Kohen Gadol would enter on Yom Kippur, but not while he was doing the avodah. Chayim misa b'dei shamayim. Shenemar v'lo yomos v'chulu v'chulu v'anichnas l'kodesh, says the Rambam. In the event that a Kohen would enter the kodesh, chutz l'kodesh hakadoshim, not in the kodesh hakadoshim, shaloi la'avodah oy lehishtach avodah, not to do an avodah or to bow down. Interesting. Bein hedyet, bein gadol. It doesn't matter if he's the Kohen heder, he's the Kohen gadol. Like he would get malchus. The einay chayiv misa, but he wouldn't be chayiv misa. Shenemar al pnei kaporos v'lo yomos al kodesh hakadoshim v'misa v'al shar habayis v'lav v'loik. L'shoini azov shel Rambam Perek Beis Hilchos Bias Mikdash halachas Aleph Beis Gimel and Dalet. The Makor, of course, is the Torah's Kohanim right in the beginning of Parshas Achrei Mos. So V'yavi b'chaleis al kodesh is an azara that the Kohen Gadol or nobody was allowed to enter the kodesh hakadoshim only on Yom Kippur. But really, that's a mistake. The Kohen Gadol or the Kohen Hedyet was not allowed to enter even the Kodesh. The Heichel was off limit. You couldn't walk into the Heichel to observe, right? You couldn't do that. Chalila v'chas. It's Kodesh. It's Kodesh. You can't just enter to, take a picture? What are you doing? You can't do that. You can go lavoida. But other than going lavoida, you're not allowed to do. In fact, there's a lav in the Torah of al yavai b'chol eis el ha-kodesh mi beis la-paroiches. Mi beis means the ganze. Now, there's no chiyav misa. That's only true for the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So the Kodesh HaKadoshim is going to remain on a higher level. It's going to be considered more chomer even after this raid. But the bottom line is, as it relates to the ikr lav, al yavai b'chol eis el ha-kodesh mi beis la-paroiches. This isser for a kohen to enter the heichal and do it shalei b'shas avoda is what's known in the vernacular as doing a bia rekonis. So he's entering, he's walking in, he's violating the va'al yavoi, and he's doing a rekonis. He's not doing anything. He's not accomplishing an avoda. It's a lav in the Torah. It is learnt out from this pasuk. Va'al yavoi b'chaleis ala kodesh. Zoktem echaschinot lefi ze yesh shloimer. What did Rabbi Yochanan say? Rabbi Yochanan said shlomim she shachton beheichol ksherim shenemar v'shachatu pesach hayomayed v'lo yehei tafel chamur min ha'ikar. It sounds a little bit to me like it's only a b'di'evet. It sounds like it's shlomim sheshachtam behechol ksherim. Why is it a b'di'evet? You should be able to do it lechatchila. If lechatchila you could do it Pesach Hayomayid and lo yeitavel chavim in ha'ikar, then lechatchila you should be able to do it in the Hayomayid as well. Zok to Minchas Chinuch. You know why? Because the Gemara says shchita lav avoidehi. And if shchita lav avoidehi, if a kohen would walk lechatchila into the hechol to do a shchita, he'd be over a lav in the Torah vayovi b'chaleis ala kodesh. It's a birei kanis, and if it's a birei kanis, it's for that reason you would not be allowed to do it. Half of a fellow. So I think it's pasha to me. That's what's going on over here. It's based on this idea. He says the emes is the Gemara asked the Kasher Rabbi Yochanan. Meisvei Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer. Minayin. How do we know? Shem hikifu over the kechavim es azara. Sha'koyhanim nichnasim lehecha va'oichlem bekotche kedashim misharim menachas. Talmud Loima. We learn it out from a pasuk. And the Gemara says, why do you have to learn it out from a pasuk? It says that Kodesh Kedashim was eaten b'chatzer oyel mayit. So if it was eaten b'chatzer oyel mayit, so lo yehei tafel chamim and ikar certainly kidin oyel mayit. And the Gemara gave an explanation. This is avoided. This is achila. This is appropriate to do b'makam rabbi. This is inappropriate to do b'makam rabbi. But what was the lashon of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira? Minayim shem hikifu over the kechavim es azara. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, it's a dramatic Rashi. And the Kohanim can't eat in the Azar. You know why? Because they're snipers. They're people they're throwing spears, they're throwing arrows. This is a pretty intense visual, right? It's a very dramatic Rashi. You don't see this every day. But the bottom line is that it's in that instance Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira said that the Kohanim are nechnasim lehechel. What does it sound like? Stamazah, if you want to go eat in the hechel, that's not something that you'd be allowed to do. Now, Pasha, you could say because of the svara, it's not so appropriate. So it's as a hergish, it's like as a rabbinic type of svara. Oh, but lefia now you can't go because it's a birei kanis. You're allowed to go to do avodah, but if you're not going to do avodah, it's not something that would be okay. But either way, this is the chiddush of the Minchas Chinuch. I just want to be ma'ir one ha'ara on the Minchas Chinuch. It's Pasha, but it ties into a raid bite that we've spoken about so many times, for sure in the double digits. So I think it's kedai to just mention it again, and that is we've mentioned so many times the Veltz Kasha on the Gemara in Masechtes Brachos. Daf Lamed Aleph on the base, where the Gemara says that after Chana was benched with a son, Shmuel, right, we're going back to Shiloh now. She said, and the Gemara says, let me tell you the rest of the story. It was Rabbi Lazar's memra. He said, Shmuel was a Moira Halacha b'fnei Rabbi. What happened was, Shmuel was a young boy, and he saw that the Olam was looking for a kohen to do shchita with a carbon, and Shmuel says, I don't understand, why do you need a kohen to do shchita? Don't you know that shchita is ksheira bizarre? They said, shchita is ksheira bizarre. How do you know that? So he told them the drasha. So they said, you know what, let's bring you to Eli, let's see what Eli has to say. So they bring Shmuel to Eli, and they ask Eli, is that true that Shechita is Ksher Bazar? So he said, yeah, it's very, very true. He said, this boy is saying good. Meimer Shapaka Amrit. Miyu, we have a problem. Because he's a Moira Lacha B'fnei Rabbi, and a Moira Lacha B'fnei Rabbi is Chayv Misa. And they wanted to kill Shmuel. And Chana started begging and crying. And Eli said, don't worry, I'll give you a bracha, you'll have another child, until she finally uttered the epic words, Elanara zehis palolti, this is the child that I davened for, this is an oska beit to the kind, absolutely not, I want this child, I'm not going to settle for another child. It's Makshama Oilam, the Chassam Sofer brings the Kasha and the Tshuva and the Malbim and Artz Chaim, and then all the Achreinim talk about this, that why was Shmuel, Omoira Allah B'fnei Rabbi, because he passed Shchita Ksher Bazar in the presence of Eli. Everybody knows, the Gemara says in Masechtas Eruvin, that the only time a Talmud is a Moira Allah B'fnei Rabbi is if he's not coming to be mafresh his Rebbe from an Isser. But if he sees his Rebbe doing an Aveira, or he sees people doing an Aveira, La Frushe Meisura, you're allowed to go ahead and be mafresh and even be a Moira Allah B'fnei Rabbi. So Makshem Achroinim, the Olam was looking to find a kohen to do shchita, because they were of the opinion that shchita was psula bazar. If a kohen was going to do the shchita, obviously he was going to wear the big dekuna, because otherwise he would be a mechuser begadim. The Rambam shita is that a kohen's only allowed to wear the big dekuna b'shas avoda, but shaloi b'shas avoda, he's not allowed to wear the big dekuna. Lefio emes that shchita lav avoda, if a kohen's going to do the shchita wearing the big dekuna, he is now going to be over the iser kalayim. So by Shmuel saying shchita lav avoda, he's saving the world from this terrible avera of being over the iser kalayim at the time of Shchita, which is lav avodah. So if it's afrush meisura, it's afrush meisura. So what's the problem of being moira halacha b'fnei rabbi? As I freak the velta kasha, and kama kumas in the shtabru to go ahead and to be miyash of this kasha. But we once spoke out Torah b'shem the ragach of a goyin and b'shem the koshag of a goyin and b'shem other goyinim and gedolei Yisrael that said a chiddush nifla. It's a davar hafle of a fella. It's not something I think you'll ever hear in Brisk or the yeshivas that learn kachim, but at the same time, a pliya diga chiddush, and that is that it could be this makom to say that even though shchita is lav avodah, but at the same time, that just means that if a zar wants to do shchita, a zar could do shchita. But avada, if a kohen does shchita, at that point, avada, the shchita is considered an avodah. Shchita lav avodah, meaning shchita ksheira bezar, and avada, if a zar does the shchita, can't have a teres avodah. But if a kohen goes ahead and the kohen does a shchita, it could be the kohen shchita is an under sort shchita, and then it's going to be considered an avodah. If that's the case, avifel kohen would have done it. It would have been considered an avodah. If it would have been considered an avodah, he wouldn't needed a big day kuna. If he needs a big day kuna, he's not being going with the Rambam's chiddush of a kohen who is the big day kuna shleidish as avodah. He's going to get malchus because of the fact that he's wearing kalayim, and as a result, there's no afrush meisura, and that's why the Gemara said in Brachas Lamed Aleph on the base that Shmuel was taka a moira halacha b'fnei rabbi. One of the mekayros or mara mekayros, I should say, to say this chiddush is the Rashi in Arba'achin, the Rashi Mesechtes Yevamis Daf Lamed Gimel on the base, where it's Mavur and Rashi the Shar Melech's diak, that even though shchita is kshera bizarre, but a zar would not be allowed to do shchita on Shabbos. So Shabbos, of course, shchita was hutra in the Beis Hamikdash, but it's Mavur and Rashi that only a kohen would be allowed to do the shchita, not the zar. And here too, everyone mutches. What's the difference? If shchita is kshera bizarre, so why is only a kohen, not a zar? So there's different terutzim that are set to answer this kasha. The Achronim say that lefi this very big chiddush, maybe there's makim to say that there's a fundamental difference between a zar shchita and a kohen shchita. When a zar does shchita, it's shchita lav avodah. When a kohen does shchita, it's an avodah. The shchita that's hutra b'Shabbos is the shchita that's an avodah. But the shchita lav avodah, that's pashut, that this teretz of the Minchas Chinuch is only going to work, not lefi that rate, which is maybe a good thing. It's fine. That rate is a very big chiddush. But the bottom line is, it's only going to work not lefi that rate. But if we're going to name on this chiddush, again, we had to say it again because we mentioned it so many times. If we're going to go with that chiddush, that when a kohen does the shchita, it's considered an avodah. Well, that would mean for a kohen to walk into the heichal and to do a shchita, that's not a biurei kanis. That's not val yaveh b'chal eser al kodesh, because he's not doing an avodah because shchita lav avodah. He is doing an avodah. Ein shchita lav avodah. That means if a zor wants to do the shchita, he could. But if a kohen does it, then it's an avodah. If it's an avodah, he's not over al yaveh b'chal eser al kodesh. And if that's the case, it would be hadra kushis aminchas chinuch leduchta. By the way, there's a Rashi in Zvachim Daf Yudalem and Aleph that says that the reason they didn't do shchita too close, right, to the kedusha is because the animal could always be marbitz, right? There's always concerns of what the animal might do. So to walk an animal into the heichel, right? I think we could all understand on our own why maybe that's not something that would be okay. But the Minchas Chinuch's teretz was a fire teretz, and that is you want to know why it's only b'di'evet shlomim sheshachtu beheichel. It's because otherwise you're being over the lav of al yavim chaleis al kodesh. One second, there's a lav to walk into the heichal. I was always taught as a kid there was a lav to walk into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's true. We were told the more severe part of that lav. We were told half the Torah is kayanim, but the rest of it and the first 4 halachas and Perek Beis of the Rambam Zilchas Beis Mikdash, that for whatever reason when we were 7 they didn't teach. I mean I understand why, but the bottom line is really there's an issur to go into the heichal also, and that issur is every kohen, even a kohen gadol, unless you're doing an avodah. Sagt the Minchas Chinuch, shchita lav avodah. Shchita lav avodah, you would not lechatchila be allowed to walk into the heichal to do the shchita. B'di'evet, it's kosher. You want to know if it's a makim? Yeah. Lo yehei tafel chamim min ha'ikar. Aber lechatchila tzugein, chalila v'chas. There's a lav in the Torah, says the Minchas Chinuch. Which lav? V'al yavoy b'chol eis el ha'kodesh.